Professor Hamamoto, and the date, September 8, year 2024, and the time, 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome, one and all, here in the chat room and on the replay as well. And I'll leave the chat on replay so that anybody who missed the live show can take a look at some of the interesting comments that come through. Now, I apologize in advance that I can't always get to the comments because I have so much material that I want to share with you, especially today when we talk about the so-called Atlanta child murders. That's the press's name for a complex series of events that includes murder. And I'll explain what I mean about that in a moment. But the second part of the title is race-motivated violence. All right, that's important because I'm not giving up on the centrality of race and racial analysis when talking about society, culture, politics, and economics. I know it's fashionable amongst supposed indie people, the herd of independent mind pop-up pundits who say, oh yeah, race is so passé, DEI, all that is out, GLBTQ, right? Where were you 10 years ago when I was propounding the same truths there? It's further back than that, really. But so you're going to have to face the fact that if you live in America, you are living in a racialized society, whether you like it or not, whether X, Y, or Z indie pundit is telling you otherwise. Because all I hear is about, yes, violence, ethnic, racial violence, civil war, the Chi-Coms especially. Yeah, the brown people are coming out from the border, close the borders, as if that's going to solve our problems. If you're talking about sealing off the borders of Washington, D.C., I think that'd be a great start. Seal it off. It's not part of America anyway. It's a district. It's called the District of Columbia. All right. And they did seal off the Capitol, they meaning the people who own the corporation called the USA. They sealed it off on January 6th. You saw it, right? So let's not reduce a whole complex of related issues down to race. I certainly am not a racial reductionist, I guess you could call it. I certainly don't impute everything, all types of human behavior, American or otherwise, to racial, gender, sexuality, and all the other cliches that we heard coming out of academia for 30 years now. So all the pop-up pundits who all of a sudden discovered so-called DEI and all the other diversity, you're way behind the curve. Right. It's, in fact, it's probably too late. It's been institutionalized. It's been institutionalized in your body and the bodies of your children, genetically, biogenetically. But that's another talk, of which I most likely have given on the Professor Hamamoto channel, which has been running for 3 years now. Take the time right now to subscribe so you'll get the notifications. And importantly, get the playlist. It'll make what I'm telling you here more coherent. And speaking of coherence, this is a caveat. This is a warning up front that the people have really low attention spans. I'm sorry your mommy didn't breastfeed you, or you've been on a diet of fluoride, or you've been vaccinated and your IQ is lower and you have zero attention span. But this is not the talk for you. This is for people who can think analytically and rationally for long stretches of time. I'm only talking about 16 minutes, right? So if you're locked in swipe land, swipe right land, TikTok land, you're in the wrong channel. So that'll save you the time from saying, well, he's just rambling. Why doesn't he get to the point? Well, if you want to see Asian women dancing along, why don't you go watch TikTok? The Chi-Com propaganda organ. We're going to talk about Chi-Coms today. There's something for everybody here. The Trump lovers, the Trump haters. I got a bone to pick with President Donald J. Trump. He's hard-headed, but I'm not letting him off the hook, right? He's part of this complex, this race-motivated violence. I don't care if he went to the Vietnamese restaurant a couple weeks ago, because I've been putting on my comments, how come there's no yellow people involved in the Trump campaign? And Lauren Chen, that's not even her real name. She's actually a white girl. She's Asian, but she's white identified. Chen is her stage name, and she's not even an American. Right? Get it straight. Nationality matters. These Five Eyes MFers who come over here and they capture the stage, people like Russell Brand. Why is Tucker F. Carlson, you know what F stands for, why is he parading this guy on the stage, an American stage, talking about my world, my society, my politics? He's got no interest in it, no skin in the game. He's a Five Eyes mofo. You got it? The time of the infiltration is over. I don't care if I don't even have 40,000 subscribers. I'm telling you the truth. That's TROOF. You notice how the question of accents in linguistics, sociolinguistics, is now on the agenda? Who put it there? Professor Hamamoto put it there. He was making fun of Ebonics and the whole situational ethnicity of Black people, yellow people, brown people, or white people, whenever it happens to benefit their funky bad selves. And we saw Kamala Harris do the same thing. So why bug out when I do it? Can a yellow man get in on the action? Especially a yellow man who grew up in the ghetto, not like Kamala Harris. She spent a lot of her youth in Canada. She's another one of them Five Eyes mofos. So it's a big gag now, it's a big meme, but I was doing this on purpose as a provocative gesture to say, you've got a lot of phonies out there and you're trying to call me out? Oh, what are you doing making fun of Black people? Well, listen, I'm a Black person. I grew up in the hood. I'm not, that's why I'm always ranking on the Black bourgeoisie. And I'll get to them in a moment. Because when we talk about Wayne Williams, the person who was blamed for the Atlanta child murders, all 28, 29, maybe even upwards of 30 killings, according to this book here, which was inspired by the killings, it's by Jack Rosewood, Child Killers, the true story of the Atlanta child. By the way, I invited Mr. Rosewood to be on the show so we can talk about his writing process, how he got into it. He has a whole career writing about true crime, just like everybody else and his brother. But if you want to read my 1999 essay, published academic essay called Empire of Death, welcome to it. I've been on this for a long time. I'm an expert in it. Okay, I'm not a newbie. You're a newbie, but that doesn't make me a newbie. You got it? So anyway, he's got a couple of insights. I'm not going to be going over the typical true crime BS. There's tons of stuff on YouTube, different platforms and so on. True crime is a cliche. It's a fad. But I still think it's valuable in understanding the larger society, its economy, its politics. It's an index to it. And I have evolved. My thoughts on serial killing has evolved over the decades. And for those of you who have a short attention span, before you bug out and start looking at Asian chicks on TikTok, hear me out. I've come to conclude that what we oftentimes view as one-off, singular crimes or series of crimes, serial killings as they're called, serial murder or spree murder. So not my term, that's their term. That oftentimes they are the products of covert operations. Do you understand? They're linked to government, not in an abstract way, not because America's a colonial settler society. They kill the white man and then send the black man and the white man over to the yellow people's land to take over there. Right? That's our history. That's why we are the land of serial killers. It's the cries and the souls of the dead all over the world. Now they're in Gaza. They're crying for justice. Metaphysically, this is what happens to a society. It begins to kill its own when the levels of atrocity rise to such high levels. Empirically, I can't prove that. I'm talking metaphysically. So early on in my essay, Empire of Death, I drew a straight historical connection between Ted Bundy and McGeorge Bundy. Do you understand that? You know who Ted Bundy is because there's thousands of people on TubeView who are supposedly experts on serial killers. And he's one of the biggies. Not very many people cover Wayne Williams for reasons that I'll talk about in a moment after I get through my introduction. But you might not know who McGeorge Bundy is. He's one of those Harvard policy intellectuals that came to prominence during the Kennedy Johnson years. These are the wise men, as they were called by the New York Slimes. The New York Times wasn't bad back then. It's really bad now. It's owned by a foreigner. It's owned by a Mexicano, or at least a large percentage. Carlos Helu Slim. He's a Mexican Syrian Jew. Why does he own the New York Times? How did that happen? It's part of the globalization. Yeah, I know that. I understand it. He's called El Ingeniero, the engineer. I think he has a doctorate in engineering. And he's engineering your mind. And he's engineering our ideological perceptions, our cultural perceptions via the New York Times. Now, I have to say there's still some good journalism coming out of the New York Times, some of it selectively. But in general, it's a bankrupt, maybe not fiscally, but it's a cultural, politically, and socially bankrupt organ. And they know it. And that's why they've been funding on the down low a lot of these pop-up pundits. They're getting prettier and prettier and handsomer and handsomer. You notice that? They're becoming more actor and actress-like. How did that happen? Well, rich people have daughters and sons that need jobs that seemingly are useful and meaningful. That's where they're being slotted. It used to be they just used to put the daughters of the wealthy into publishing. But now they can make them into little TubeView superstars. So I'm competing with them, and yeah, let's bring on the competition. I don't care. I'm not complaining. I'm not a victim. I'm a YouTube celebrity in my own mind. Okay, so I want you to look at my playlist, look at my previous talk on the so-called Zodiac killers. It's to my point, one of the main talks that I gave that brought me close to the conclusion that a lot of these seemingly random crimes by psycho killers, KKC, fa 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 fa. Yeah, it's in the popular culture. A lot of these psycho killers, and unwittingly perhaps, but they're agents of these covert organizations, alphabet, military, and some that we don't even really know, and foreign entities as well. Five Eyes and beyond. Israel's not technically a Five Eyes country, but it's the tail that's wagging the dog. So look at that one on the Zodiac Killers. They went in there to mop up certain people. They were targeted and they made it look like a bunch of serial killings. Okay, this requires a new epistemology. That's a fancy word for knowledge, a way of knowing. Epistemology. All right. You have to break through the conditioning that all the pop-up pundits hooked you up into. And that's why I keep going after it, because they are normalizing, they're solidifying all these false ideas in your mind. Oh, they don't try to explain why this is taking place. They'll give you the details, the gruesome backstory and all that. And I'm not going to bother with that today, unless it's related to this larger point that I'm making. We're talking about state crimes. We're talking about political crimes, and that includes the Atlanta child murders. And this also intersects, as I alluded to earlier, with the black bourgeoisie of Atlanta, GA. The Atlanta, GA, the place where I used to stay. That's a line from James Brown, when he's calling out all the different cultural, social, political, economic capitals of Black America. Well, Atlanta, GA is the crown jewel. Maybe DC is, but Atlanta, definitely. Why? Because that's the birthplace of the modern Black civil rights movement, is led by people like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And he was ordained as a priest, a Baptist pastor. Not a priest. I'm sorry, we're not in Catholic land at the moment. When he was 19 years old, he was a teenager, and his first church was actually the Dexter Street Church in Montgomery, Alabama. That's why there was a lot of civil rights activity centered around Montgomery. It was church-based. And that's why the Black church, the Christian church, the Baptist church has been infiltrated and degraded because it's a source of political as well as spiritual and economic strength of African American people going back to colonial times. So Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., his father was senior. He was known as Big Martin, I think it was, or Daddy King. That's not, with all due respect, that's not my term. He was known affectionately by his own flock of followers as Daddy King. So that's what we associate with Atlanta. And then not really that long after his assassination by forces unknown, right? Did you hear me correctly when I said a lot of these one-offs seem to be linked to these alphabet agencies? You know the story, Martin Luther King Jr., you know the story of RFK Jr., you know the story of JFK, and on Malcolm X. But it's not just marquee names that get taken down. It's also everyday people. They might know something. They might know too much. Maybe they got some dirt on a political figure. Maybe they know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. Hence, serial killings. Start looking at these so-called one-off serial killings. In fact, we should come up with a different term than serial killing, because it's become hackneyed. It's a cliche. And it leads to recipe knowledge. Yeah, just crank it in there. Put all the ingredients in. Presto, serial killers. And you can be like a newbie. You don't have to do anything. You just repeat it. You can self-publish a book and call yourself an expert. People who don't know have any judgment or any context to evaluate this type of work. We're going to They're going to flock to you. You can get up on the Joe Rogan show and talk out of your ass for 2 hours straight, and no one's going to call you out, except for me. I will. I've written on this stuff. Do I need to show you all the time? I'm a yellow person, so I'm not really prone to bragging on myself like other ethnicities. But I know in order to get over in American society, it's got to be me, 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 me. I'm the greatest. I'm super bad. It's me, it's me, it's me, it's I. But I'm a yellow person and I wasn't socialized that way. But I live in America, so I understand. Why do you think I got so much trouble at University of California, Davis? Because I did not act like an Oriental to either my peers or the administration. I took a backseat to nobody. Now, I didn't come at them with an attitude like I'm coming with you now, because I need to hold your attention. But they could feel it. They know it. They knew that I didn't need no laws protecting me from race motivated violence. I'll take care of myself. Thank you very much. Not even your US Constitution will keep me out of a concentration camp when it gets down to it. So here's one of my books, because I'm advertising myself. Like Norman Mailer said, advertising for monitored peril. This is about yellow people on television, network. It's good. It's a classic. It's plagiarized. It's heavily plagiarized. All these posers who are in so-called Asian American studies in all the second-rate institutions and the premier institutions around the United States of America, they know who I am, but they won't admit it because I'm in the yellow stain on their white sink. Here's my first book. It's called Nervous Laughter. Great title. It's about the situation comedy. I know about media. That's my expertise. Primarily American media, but others. Here's my current book. If you want to start out on something provocative and relevant today, these books are relevant. They're still in print, by the way. Start with Servitors of Empire. And this is my studies of all the different yellow people who are creeps and criminals at a high level, right? They're in finance, they're in government. There's more and more of them all the time. They're medical doctors. They're elected officials. So-called Asian American studies people hate this because we're supposed to be goody goods. We're supposed to be the good minority. We don't loud talk nobody. And we're hard workers and we don't loudmouth anybody. But if you want to read about contemporary American politics, US politics, read this. It also explains why there's this rash of anti-yellow violence that's very much related to the killings of Atlanta from the late 70s to the 80s. Because Wayne Williams, the critics of the investigation, from the police chief all the way to the board and the mayor's office, they were criticized by the Black community for not paying attention to the disappearance of Black children, and later on become adult victims as well, but start out with children. And I mention that because that's why I think that Wayne Williams might not have been the only person involved in these killings that were all lumped together. Who was behind it and why? And was the Black bourgeoisie involved with the white ruling class? We like to hear how much the white people oppress the Black people. And only on Professor Hamamoto's channel do I call out the Black bourgeoisie with regularity. David Cranmer Underdown, are you with me? He's Detroit Dave. He knows what I'm talking about because the black bourgeoisie were put in the catbird seat in front of the energy and automotive elite to front for them in Detroit. And they pasted it over with little, with a dash of Motown records. I'm not putting down Detroit, but that's the underlying reality here. So, by the way, that's not me. I suspected this, but Rosewood himself devotes a couple of passages to the idea that the black bourgeoisie might have been complicit in the disappearance of these black children and later adults. I'm talking about young adults, but they're not children. They're not minors. Let's say they're over 18. Some, I think, the oldest one, who's attributed to Wayne Williams, even though he was not indicted for it, was, I believe, 28 years old. And it's all part of supposedly his modus operandus. Let's see what I have here. And there's also, I'll get back to this later. Otherwise, it's a pretty pedestrian book. It just recounts the facts, but he does bring up Rosewood brings up three areas that I feel are worthwhile pursuing. One is that the black bourgeoisie might be complicit in the Atlanta child murders, and somehow, maybe not directly, but in trying to cover it up, try to paste over it, and try to just move it out of the memory, off the agenda. Because Atlanta was on the move. It was the model city of the New South. That's not my description. This is what the urban anthropologist described, the sociologist, right? And the city boosters said, we got to make ourselves into a new form of city. We're anti-racist. We're a city for everybody, for the new economy. That would be Atlanta, GA. Hot Atlanta, which became a hot place to settle over recent years. I don't know about currently. Let me read from, by the way, did I tell you I invited him on the show? And he was kind enough to respond, and because I'm trying. A lot of authors don't like to come on Professor Hamamoto. I'm not going to challenge them. I just want to hear what they have to say. I'm not going to debate them. I'm not going to argue with them. Their work is their work. I might not agree with it, but I want to showcase what they've done, because this does represent a lot of hard work and a lot of thinking. Let me just say that. And I don't mean to sound dismissive of it at all. But he does, and I suspected myself, but he reinforces my own prejudice. He says, quoting, the woman's boyfriend also claimed that to have dumped some of the bodies once the mysterious murderous white people had their fun. This is reminiscent of what was going on in the Oakland County child murders out in the Detroit area. Again, look at the playlist. You got to subscribe. Look at the playlist. I gave a talk on it. This is in the Detroit area, and it's never been solved. Why? Because it's suspected that the high bourgeoisie of Detroit City were involved in all kinds of unseemly crimes. Without going through the show again, just save some time and look at it, and look at the follow-up conversation that I had with David Cranmer Underdown. It was very well received because he's Detroit Dave. He's from the area. He knows about the black bourgeoisie. He knows about he went to school with the ruling class, for goodness sakes. He went to all the kids' bar mitzvahs. He went to their birthday parties. He went to the wedding receptions. That's his world. He went to the private schools. So that type of information you can't find it in a book alone. So check that out. But anyway, so I'm reading here again. The theory sounded outlandish to nearly every agent on the task force. Although the woman made the call before the bodies of the men were discovered, so she didn't read about it in the paper, their disappearances were publicized to the investigators So the investigators wrote the entire thing off as another case of someone trying to seek attention. Reading on, and I'm not going to read from the book extensively. You can do that on your own. One of the more elaborate conspiracy theories investigated by the task force involves a potential organized pedophile ring led by members of Atlanta's black elite. That's what I refer to as the black bourgeoisie, of which Kamala Harris is a part of the black bourgeoisie. I learned that Roland Martin is part of the black. I figured he was, but I got some of the receipts now. He was part of a black fraternity. He went to, I think, a historically black college, just like, or maybe he didn't. I think he just went to a state university because they give him scholarship money. That's Roland Martin, who's always sweating the white man with his racial talk. Right? And I say that because the forgotten people in all this discussion is the yellow person, which you'll get into before I finish today's talk, as it relates to Atlanta specifically. Pedophile ring, members of Atlanta's black elite, the black bourgeoisie. All right. Such as people that go to Howard University and belong to Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, secret society. It's not just white people that have secret societies. Yellow people have them. Brown people have them. Certainly black people have them as well. And Kamala Harris. And no one's made an issue of it. You know why? Because all the network people and CNN, they belong to these honor societies and the secret societies themselves. So people will start asking questions about them. That's their in. That's their connection. So that's Kamala Harris. It's not the fact that she's not really, quote unquote, black, or that she speaks situationally Ebonics, or sometimes it's her approximation of a working class accent, right? It's not that. She's a member of secret society. They got it all wrapped up. She's the lady for the black bourgeoisie who's working with the other people. It's all articulated. Do you get it? It might be too complex for you the newbies to this, but mull it over, right? You're not going to get this from Steven Crowder. You're not going to get it from Brett Weinstein, or Joe Rogan. You're not going to get it from Russell Brand. You're not going to get it from Stu Peters. You're not going to get it. They're all these cutesies. I can't remember their name now. You're not going to get it from Lauren Southern. I think she's Canadian. You're not going to get it from Lauren Chen, who's also Canadian. National, on and on and on. Okay, so you can read this for yourself, but I'm just showing you. I'm not making it up. So that's a couple of the points here. The other point is that, let's see here, there's a list. The list refers to the working list compiled by the task force of murdered boys and young men who were believed to have been victims of the Atlanta child killer. Although Dettinger, this is an author, I have to find his article, I haven't found it yet, argues that Wayne Williams is more than likely responsible for at least a few of the murders, he is adamant that there were a number of other killers involved. Instead of dredging up the Klan conspiracy theory, Dettinger explored the possibility of organized pedophile groups originally operating in the Atlanta area. That wasn't the original defense when Wayne Williams was tried on 2 charges, both of which he was convicted. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences to Valdosta State Prison in Georgia. He's still alive, by the way. All right, so here's something that we benefit from by learning in retrospect about people like Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, that whole milieu. And we learned from the Detroit child killers, the Oakland County killers, and all these other essays that I've published and the talks that I've given on the Zodiac killers. You could even say that the so-called Manson family was reflective of this larger inner workings of intelligence agencies, right? And the death, I gave a whole talk on it. The murder of Abigail Folger, the heir to the Folger coffee fortune, was not an accident. It was not coincidental. In fact, it might be, and I'm speculating here, she might have been the principal target. And she might have been the victim of not only US intelligence, but Polish intelligence. Don't laugh. This is not a Polish joke, okay? Polish intelligence helped win the war against the Third Reich. They were getting a lot of really good intel, and they had to send it to Britain, and they took credit for it because Poland was occupied. Right. So yeah. Anyway, I make that argument in that talk if you care to look back on it. And the other part that I think this is what I would ask Rosewood if he wanted to come. He wanted to stay out of the limelight for personal reasons, and I can't knock him for that. I understand. But he doesn't claim, but Wayne Williams claimed that as a teenager, he was working for the Central Intelligence Agency. And back then, that was just a crazy, bizarre idea. Today, it sounds very plausible. He could have been in one of those gifted programs because he was super bright. He was highly intelligent. He was clever. He was capable of elaborate planning. He got kind of sloppy toward the end. Both of his parents, he came from a good home. Both of his parents were educators. They were teachers. He was a middle-class kid. And he was really good with radio. His parents even let him set up his own amateur radio station in his own bedroom. And he liked to hang out at the local, you could do it back then when everything wasn't owned by Clearwater. There were local mom and pop radio stations. And if you were an earnest teenager and you hung around enough, they'll let you clean out the ashtrays and do some sweeping around. And you might be able to work your way into higher levels working in the studio, the broadcasting studio. That's how they did it in the old days. You had to clean the toilets and do some scrubbing and be a gopher before you can get into really learning your craft. These days, you come out of an Ivy League school and daddy will have a job for you, waiting for you at NBC or CNN. Check out all the younger talent with all these networks, and even the ones that are supposedly independent. Check out their family going back 1, 2, 3 generations. They're hooked in. Because even hooked in people need some work that seemingly has purpose. So that's Wayne Williams' profile. So I think his claim needs to be investigated. I'm not saying it's true, but he wouldn't be the first young person who was brought into one of these mentally gifted minor programs. And I talked about that when I gave a talk on Philip K. Dick, the writer, the science fiction writer, the person who inspired these movies that were adapted from his work. That Philip K. Dick. I talked about it because he was one of those people, and one of his wives, he was married more than once, both shared a common experience in one of these mentally gifted programs that the state of California set up to find out bright young people who could be integrated for intelligence work into the future. So those of you who are just hung up on one Manchurian candidate, or you're stuck in Lee Harvey Oswald land, Wake up. I couldn't even put a figure on the number of people that have gone through these programs and are walking around ready to be mobilized as we speak. And I myself was cruised from one of those programs, I'm pretty sure. Because as I mentioned before, I was in the very first, this is Orange County, California. I was in the very first Orange County academic decathlon. Do you understand that? So my high school counselors and all the people who study the little chillins, they knew where I was at. They knew where you're at. What do you think you were doing when you had the number 2 pencils and filling in those little squares? And you were in your little advanced reading group, or you were in this little special high achievement track. Do you think the national security state, the national intelligentsia state leaves this to chance? No, because people like me are a potential threat to the state power. So they grow their own, or they try to identify people like me and you. Most likely, you people who are in the live stream right now are a product of some kind of mentally gifted minor program where you were tested. It all kind of comes from the Terman father and son team. He called his bright gifted miners Termans termites because they were going to burrow into the infrastructure of the New World Order and bring it down. They were going to bring down America and have it run by a technocratic elite. And a lot of these yellow people, especially in engineering and medicine, have been recruited into that, performing intellectual labor for that specific purpose. And I was one of them. Excuse me. Gotta soothe my throat. So that was Wayne Williams. I don't know if he was in this mentally gifted minors program, but he certainly fits the profile of a college-bound individual. He was headed for university studies, but I think he got other orders. And you know what those orders were? Abduct Black children for group A, B, or C. I won't specify their race, ethnicity, or social class. I'll leave that up to your imagination because it's going on in 2024. You know, even Donald Trump is kind of tiptoeing up to the issue. He won't plunge into it because it might sully his own reputation. But you know what I'm talking about. You think this started recently just because some newbies, some of these pretty boys and pretty girls who started surfacing up as experts, the pop-up pundits, they've surfaced as experts on adrenochrome and pedophilia and human trafficking. They're actors. You got it? See who their mamas and papas are and where they descend from. They're not organic. That's a hint. So, anyway, I'd say that, not me, this is what's estimated by the various experts, so-called, close to 30 might have been implicated, but I'm leaning towards the idea that there were multiple killers. It wasn't just Wayne Williams. So that's what took place in the aftermath of this incredible social movement known as the modern Black civil rights movement. It was civil rights for everybody. When I say Black civil rights, they spearheaded, but it benefited all Americans. Especially, it benefited women specifically. Title IX, for example, women's sports, education. Now they, on a percentage basis, are overrepresented in universities. And of course, corporations are like Blackwater. They're investors. They're trying to do social engineering to make this into a female-led society while emasculating the people with male chromosomal endowment. So this is Martin Luther King Jr. land.
Let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. And don't let anybody make you think that God...
Very powerful. But that talk there, that excerpt is from a talk that he gave at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was run by his father. I think even his grandfather had a connection to the church, but his father is a senior. Daddy King, as he was known affectionately, was the chief pastor there. And that's, of course, why one of the reasons why Martin Luther King Jr. started out in Montgomery, because his seat in Atlanta was being filled very nicely by his father. So that was what was taking place in Atlanta when I was growing up, and the whole nation looked to Atlanta as this place of progressive change, where all the different groups and races and peoples can come together and rebuild America and have it be formed into truly the city on the hill based upon these Christian principles. And then who comes into the scene but Wayne Williams?
My team was on a mission, searching for the past, looking to unlock the facts of what many consider to be the darkest hours in Atlanta's history.
Atlanta police say the remains of what appear to be two human skeletons.
From 1979 to 1981, 29 African-American children, and then later adults, were murdered. Their bodies dumped like trash across metro Atlanta. A 30th child is still missing. The city was on fire with fear.
See, my child's scared to come outdoors. I mean, it's rough.
Families terrified their child could be next as police search for the killer or killers.
From all indications, these bones are of a small child.
Finally, a break. An unlikely suspect surfaces. Police charge Wayne Williams with the murders of 2 adults. Prosecutors linked him to 10 more murder victims during the trial, nearly all of them children. The jury's verdict? Guilty as charged. To this day, Williams still proclaims his innocence.
I'm just speaking from the heart.
Okay, he later has subsequently held more than a few press conferences throwing out his new theories of what really happened. And the more time elapses and the more we find about other cases, the more plausible it becomes, to the point where even one of his more recent attorneys says, and the case has been opened once or twice, subsequently it's been shot down. There's still some information that is being suppressed. So he has a new attorney, I don't know if she's the most recent one, who is saying that the case needs to be re-examined.
At this point, we need answers. He is known widely as the person who is responsible for the Atlanta child murders, but he was not convicted of killing a single child.
All new tonight, Wayne Williams has a new attorney, and the attorney is talking exclusively with 11 Alive. Williams in prison, convicted of murdering 2 men, presumed guilty of murdering at least 24 children. Nearly 40 years after his conviction, the investigation is now back open. But his attorney told Caitlin Ross they still don't have any answers.
Janice Mann just sat down with Wayne Williams in prison, and she says they talked for 3 hours about his case. And she says he cried, talking about how the families of the children murdered in Atlanta in the 70s and 80s still don't have closure. Jimmy Howard looked up to Wayne Williams in the 80s. He still does.
He's a guy that you would want to be your brother, your uncle, Your dad, he's a great guy.
Howard started an R&B group with Williams in the months before he was arrested and says the accusations against his friend and mentor are an old tune.
You know, it's just like listening to you hear it so much, it becomes a hit song. So it gets in their mind, you know, but until they sit down and really get into this case, what took place, they understand it better.
Attorney Janice Mann didn't know much about Wayne Williams when she was asked to represent him.
I was absolutely stunned by the lack of evidence that convicted him, and it took me a little while to understand the theater in the community, the political and social atmosphere that existed at that time.
In 1981, Williams was convicted of murdering 2 grown men, but at trial, prosecutors told the jury he was responsible for the deaths of dozens of children, even though he was never charged.
We start with the facts. Where are the facts? Where is the evidence?
Former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms reopened the investigation into those child murders in 2021. Atlanta police sent 2 DNA samples to a specialized testing facility in Utah. But 16 months later, Mann says she can't get answers about what those tests found.
Okay, I can't show you the entire segment there. That's his most recent. This is only 2021. This is fairly recent. Her name's Janice Mann. And the more I read about the case, and I'm going to be reading more, the more needs to be uncovered and released information. And the one area, and this is no knock on him because he might not have been aware of the situation, but months ago, maybe a couple of years ago already, I gave a talk on organ trafficking. It's all the rage right now, talking about human trafficking, but part of human trafficking is not just prostitution, but organ trafficking. And it might be, this is, again, speculation that Wayne Williams or the people behind him are working with him or contracted with him, associated with him loosely or closely, I don't really know, might have been involved in the trafficking of organs, taking them from healthy Black children and healthy young Black men. So go back to my earlier talk about this. Black bodies are in particular demand for the organ transplant trade. And a good deal of it is on the Black market because there's a waiting list for kidneys and corneas and other vital parts of the human anatomy. And you know about Planned Parenthood, how they're using parts of human fetuses as part of what's been called the corpse economy, the death economy. Within capitalism, everything can be monetized, including human body parts and human life, and animal life in general, plant life. So that's something that needs to be explored. In the fiction realm, we've seen books like, God, I can't remember what it's called. It's the first time I came across it was through a piece of fiction. I said, it can't be true. I think it was an Elmore Leonard book. I think it was called Raylene, about a guy who was drugged, woke up in a tub of ice, and his kidneys were gone. So I started looking into it, and I listened to the late social critic Dick Gregory, and he was talking about how these drive-by shootings in the so-called hood, the so-called ghetto, were not strictly gang warfare. A lot of them were assassination, again, to reap the bodies and the harvesting of healthy young Black men. And if you want to look at this historically, what was the classic novel Frankenstein about? It's about the parting out of corpses, because by the time Mary Shelley, she's given the credit, it's not actually her, it's Percy Bysshe Shelley that wrote it. He had to use a front because he was on the run from the government for sedition. That's why he moved to Switzerland for a while. But by the early 1700s, the exchange in corpses and bodies was already robust. There was a market for skeletons and organs in London. This is where the whole grave digger mythology, not necessarily mythology, started to arise. The Jack the Ripper later on, getting into the Victorian era. So this is part of Anglo-American history when you want to look at it that way. So why not in Georgia? Especially when organ transplantation had been proven to be workable, when the South African surgeon, Dr. Christian Barnard, successfully transplanted a human heart into a body. In another area down in Southern California, University of Laverne Medical Center, that they pioneered a lot of organ transplant. And so there was a uptick in demand for human organs. And the timeline lines up with what was going on in Atlanta at the time that Wayne Williams, quote unquote, was in operation. No pun intended. Right. So these are issues that need to be talked about. And again, I forgot to finish my thought. If you want to see a piece of cinema that talks about these issues in narrative form, then go see Get Out, the film. It's about a black man who goes up to the country, New England, with his white girlfriend, and he gets introduced to all these hoity-toity people, and they're all, he didn't know at the time, they're all organ recipient waiting for him to be parted out. That's the film, Get Out. So check it out. It's horrific. Okay, as I wind down then, I promised you that I would connect the race-motivated, because they need healthy black bodies. They meaning the transplantation industry, the black market industry. How that connects with the more recent mass spree kill, that's their term, spree killing, because the press loves it. Just as these people who have these so-called true crime channels going on, these programs love it as well. They're targeting the murder of 7 massage parlor workers. And it comes out later because they want to repress the idea that they're yellow. They're all Asian except for one. So is that race motivated or not? I say yes. Not only because I'm a yellow person, but I understand the history. The United States military has been killing yellow and brown people after they got through with the Reds almost continuously up till 2024. Right? And it's not just white people. A lot of, if you look recently, black people are overrepresented in the U.S. military. Way overrepresented. So are Latinos. So it's not just a white thing. Okay, it's there are not very many Asians there. They'll probably try to recruit more by getting them involved in petty crime. Say, listen, you're going to go to prison. Your only alternative is you got to join the army. Right. So in 2021, there was a cataclysm that took place in the Atlanta area at 3 separate, they call them euphemistically health spas, but there are prostitution dens. You've seen them. If you live in even a small town, medium-sized, definitely a large city, you have these massage parlors all over the place. And you don't even have to go in to know that what is the racial identity of the women's that work there. Yes, they're yellow. Why do you think they're yellow and they're not black and they're not brown and they're not Arab and they're not Muslim? They are Asian. They're typically Chinese or Korean currently. It's because America has most of its military bases in East Asia. So the 18-year-old cherry boys that go over there, Black, Latino, white, and even other Asians, that's where they get their sexual experience. And they carry that through their whole life. And that's why you see the fetishization of Asian yellow women. Even Lauren Chen, the Canadian woman who's not really married to an Asian person. I'm not saying it's a requirement, but that's not her name. That's her stage name. She benefits from this. Oh, yeah, we'll look at Lauren Chen. She's good looking. So here's the spa. If you're not familiar, it's only happened a couple years ago. Here's the spa shooting. This is in Atlanta. And again, just like the task force, quote unquote, in Atlanta, Wayne Williams didn't want to look at the Black community because the Black bourgeoisie didn't want the publicity. Oh, it might be Black people. No, it had to be a white guy. It had to be the KKK. It wasn't us. So they stonewalled it. And the white establishment stonewalled it. It's the same way 2021. They don't want to say it's a race-based anti-Asian crime. When we got a former president and a presidential candidate named Donald John Trump, who's race baiting his way back into the White House. I'm sorry for all you Trump supporters, but I'm not going to let that pass. That's a bullshit. I am not going to let yellow people be the convenient racial scapegoat once again for conniving, opportunistic politicians. I don't care if they're running for president. I don't even care if they're talk show hosts. I'm not going to stand for it. And yellow people are not going to stand for it. And the Koreans who own the shops in Los Angeles, who were attacked by a largely Latino mob with a sprinkling of Black people, they fought back. Okay, that's the new yellow power. Not the one you study in academia. That's called Asian American Studies. That's please like us. We have good food. We're polite. We provide services for you. The pharmacist is always a yellow woman in a lab coat. We're so inoffensive. No, the Koreans of Koreatown, Los Angeles said, no, we're shooting back. And the reason I mention this because the paroxysms of violence that are now being planned by the usual suspects, they're going to be targeting Asian communities. Koreatown, New York, Koreatown, Los Angeles, Koreatown, Chicago, Little Saigon, Seattle, Chinatown. That's where it's going to happen. And no one's going to care because it's Mr. Miyagi.
Tonight, a violent night across the area. A total of 8 people killed in 3 separate shootings, all at massage parlors.
Now, we just got the mugshot of the man authorities say is connected to all of the shootings. Take a look. He is 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long. There is much to figure out, so here is what we know right now. The first shooting occurred off Highway 92 in Cherokee County. 4 people died there. Another was taken to the hospital.
And a short time later, Atlanta police were called to shootings at 2 separate massage parlors in Midtown. A total of 4 people were killed. Let's get you straight to 11 Alive's John Sherrick, who is live for us in Cherokee County. Now, John, we know that the suspect was actually caught in South Georgia.
Correct. And it didn't take long for investigators to connect all 8 homicides at all 3 crime scenes to the same suspect. Investigators say video surveillance at all 3 crime scenes show the same man and the same car. The suspect, 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long of Cherokee County here north of Atlanta, arrested in South Georgia.
All right, and there were some mild ripples of protest by the so-called Asian American advocacy groups and so-called Asian American studies and academia. They sort of put a token protest in for the utter lack of interest in these crimes that were being perpetrated on sex workers. I guess they were. I mean, if you want to be honest about it, they were sex workers. They call them massage parlor workers. And more recently, you have the race baiting of President Trump, which we'll show in a moment. But let me finish up with the hate angle that Atlanta is mired in. It didn't end with Wayne Williams. It might surface again, not just in Atlanta, but all over these United States of America. But you won't care because Mr. Miyagi, even though the backstory is that his family was thrown in a concentration camp, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're only Korean merchants. It's just some rude people, some rude yellow people who just barely set foot in this country and they have their own businesses. My gosh. George Floyd, man, you got to go in there and pass bad checks on the yellow people who run the convenience store in the corner and then make George Floyd a martyr. Now, I want to talk about the yellow people that are murdered overseas in Okinawa, where I spent some time, and South Korea in particular, by people like, that were making into these heroes. So here we go.
Of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Department spoke to reporters about the suspect, Robert Aaron Long.
He claims that these, and as the chief said, this is still early, but he does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate.
Sheriff, did you have the sense that he understood the gravity of what he did?
When I spoke with investigators, they interviewed him this morning, and they got that impression that yes, he understood the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope. And yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
Yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did, said Captain Baker. His comments and the decision by law enforcement authorities to focus on Long's narrative drew widespread criticism. After reviewing Baker's social media accounts, BuzzFeed News reported on an April 2020 Facebook post in which Baker shared an image of T-shirts with logos that looked like the Corona beer label and the racist slogan, quote, COVID-19 imported virus from China. Captain Baker wrote on the post, quote, love my shirt, get yours while they last, unquote. California Democratic Congressmember Ted Lieu tweeted, quote, if the Facebook post is accurate and based on today's press conference, I would not have confidence in the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office to conduct a fair investigation that respected the Asian victim.
Well, it comes from Ted Lieu, so it's probably, I'm assuming, not really sincere. I think he's, being from L.A., feels that at least he's slightly obligated to give lip service to the safety of yellow people. So this is being fomented all the way from the top, including Donald Trump. And I'm going to end today's cast on taking a look at some of the incendiary comments of President Donald J. Trump. These will not stand. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. And I know a lot of you are Trump worshipers. You'll lick his ass up and down because, hey, it's popular to be that way. Where were you 6 years ago? Where were you 10 years ago? No, you're pop-up pundits. You're political opportunists. Some of you, many of you, are not even American citizens. And some of you who are supposedly Trump supporters are dual citizens. I'm a third, and one side of my family, a fourth generation American. You dig? So here's President Trump. By the way, I voted for him twice. The first time when he was allowed to take office, and the second time when he was cheated out of the office. All right, and I'll leave it a big secret whether I go for him again. But I'm not going to give him a free pass. And he's got to do more than just go to some Vietnamese restaurant and handle a pair of chopsticks and say, yeah, I really support you, hardworking Oriental people. And same with Kamala Harris, just because she comes from San Francisco. You know, I want her to go in the debate, the forthcoming debate. I want Kamala Harris to go on air, you know, go into the world media and start speaking in a chinky accent. I am Kamala Harris. I will lead America right into the arms of China. The Chi-Coms. Yes, there was a Chinese spy in New York City. Yeah, don't listen to Dave Hodges, who talks about the Chi-Com. Do not listen to Alex Jones. He goes in a chopstick accent. Saying, the Chi-Com, the China virus. Do not listen. So here's our presidential candidate. He gets points for teaming up with RFK Jr., but here he is. And people say, oh, he's so honest. He's straightforward. Well, you know what? I'm honest and straightforward. Mr. President, you're full of shit.
Please.
Said many times that the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if every day Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
Why does it matter?
Okay, anybody else? Please, go ahead.
So there's the great, big, strong Donald J. Trump being intimidated by the little Oriental woman who otherwise can meet her death in a massage parlor or in Okinawa or in South Korea, wherever there's a lot of U.S. military troops occupying these Asian countries. So here he is. He's doubling down. He's not backing down from Operation Warp Speed, and he's not backing down from the race baiting, right? It's got to be a China virus.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. Comes from China. I want to be accurate.
About Chinese Americans
please, John.
Please. The aides behind you. Are you comfortable with this term?
I have great love for all of the people from our country. But as you know, China tried to say at one point, maybe they stopped now, that it was caused by American soldiers. That can't happen. It's not going to happen. Not as long as I'm president. It comes from China.
Yeah, look at that Viper, Michael Pence right there. Oh man, what theater. So I want to conclude by, again, reiterating the point that just like the CBS reporter said, why are you singling me out with this racially tinged invective? And she's a CBS reporter. That, I presume, stands for Columbia Broadcasting System, not China Broadcasting System. And of course, that conveniently lets off the hook the whole NIH and the Pentagon, that whole connection, Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx, and all these other characters, right? All the other biological weapons production efforts, infrastructure we have in the United States and places like Ukraine, right? China, the indispensable enemy, once more. So this is what happens. This is in 1992, and I happened to be teaching in LA. I was teaching at UCLA when the feces hit the fan, when the brown and the black people started attacking the yellow people, because we were in another high period of anti-Asian sentiment that was ready to bust out. And all that was required was a trigger event. In this case, it was the Rodney King beatdown. Do we want to see a repeat of this in 2005 after Donald Trump is inaugurated president, or the run up to it? Because if I was predicting, and I'm not, this is a scenario that I think needs to be thought about very carefully. So this is how the Korean American community responded to the attack on their businesses and their homes and their persons, exercising their Second Amendment right to the Constitution that Kamala Harris wants to violate. Check it out.
The growing number of rioters in the streets began attacking civilians, throwing debris at cars, pulling people from their vehicles, smashing shop windows, and setting them on fire. The chaos had sent shockwaves into the living rooms of millions of Americans across the nation, as a Chinese immigrant by the name of Choi Si-choi and a trucker named Reginald Denny, who was delivering gravel for the construction of low-income housing, were both horrifically attacked during live coverage of the riots. At approximately 7:15 p.m., as reports of vandalism, looting, and physical attacks continued to come in, Lieutenant Mullen elected to take the information but not respond. Mullen was later relieved by a captain, ordering officers only to assess the Florence and Normandy area. And at 12:15 a.m., Mayor Bradley signed an order for a dusk to dawn curfew, as well as declaring a state of emergency for the city of Los Angeles. And on the following day, by mid-morning, violence appeared widespread, as extensive looting and arson was witnessed across Los Angeles County. The rioting moved from South Central Los Angeles, going north through Central Los Angeles, decimating the neighborhoods as far as Westlake to Fairfax, before reaching Hollywood. The looting and fires engulfed Hollywood Boulevard, and simultaneously rioting moved west into neighboring independent cities of Compton, Carson, and Long Beach. You might even remember Long Beach native Bradley Noel singing about it on Sublime's self-titled album.
First spot we hit it was my liquor store.
R.I.P. Bradley Noel, fucking legend. From Olympic Street to 120th Street laid the forefront of many small family-owned local businesses, primarily owned by first-generation Korean immigrants, many of whom escaped from North Korea into South Korea before immigrating to the United States. Many of whom were formerly voluntold soldiers who knew how to fight. And the fight came to Koreatown rather swiftly, as rioters moved up north from Florence and Normandy with a newfound thirst for looting. At 11:30 a.m., one employee of a local gun store, David Jew, was working behind the counter when the shop phone rang. It was a phone call from his employer, Richard Park, who owned another store a few doors down. Richard informed David that he was at the nearby shop and in the middle of a gunfight. David locked up the gun store, ran across the parking lot, armed with a Beretta. When he arrived, he heard gunshots, at which point looters from across the street made their way to the gun shop plaza and opened fire on Richard and David. But when the two men fired back, the assailants fled the area immediately. Word quickly spread throughout Koreatown that this method had worked, in not only protecting Richard's property, but his life. Korean business owners who caught word of this began to phone in a Los Angeles-based radio station called Radio Korea, pleading to the radio station's audience for an armed response to help protect their property.
Everybody parked in the street and they took some everything, liquor, beer.
When you got here, you said people were still inside the store. What did you do?
Sit inside. I shut 8 times, everybody moved.
A merchant guarding his properties. You got anybody out there or just a shot?
Rick Romero out here. All of the merchants here are not going to wait for the National Guard or police or anybody else. You talked about guerrilla warfare, and it's right here, right on the premises here. Just about every one of the individuals in this.
Radio Korea quickly became dubbed Koreatown's makeshift command center, warning listeners of the whereabouts of incoming looters, and offered itself as a 911 system, allowing shop owners to call out for help over the air. After the realization sank in, there would be no response from police, fire, or EMS, already stretched too thin, responding to thousands of ongoing emergencies.
저기 거기 있는 남자 어디예요? 남자 옷 가게. 네, 거기 탔어요? 네, 거기가 지금 불타고 있어요.
We need additional guard in here.
We have no police support whatsoever. People are driving by shooting at us, and we have to do something about it.
A local resident by the name of Ina Cho and president of the Korean Veterans Association in 1992 was listening to the broadcast and decided to call in a little broadcast of his own, requesting all Korean Marine Corps veterans to respond to the area. Soon after, a group of around 15 Korean Marine Corps veterans arrived, equipped with rifles and rendezvoused with Cho. The men responded to a large electronics warehouse, Kim's TV, where Radio Korea was broadcasting that a mob of looters.
Okay, there's at least a couple of long-length, feature-length documentaries on the Koreans on the roof. They were defending their homes themselves and their businesses. This is also was taking place in the late, and look at signals in the popular culture. Films, video games, especially single shooter video games. We're seeing a lot of these assassins who I think are being controlled. I have an X account if you want to check out. I put a bibliography of articles I've been reading on single shooter video games. But if you look at the popular culture at the time, you had, and I have the CD, the recording, there was a recording by Ice Cube, who's now a big time actor. I didn't see any big time Korean Americans rise in stature as a result of this, but he did a tune called Black Korea on Priority Records. I have it. The later releases left it off, but the end of the tune, it's an angry one, says, you know, you're not going to turn the ghetto into the Black Korea. That's a threat. So this is what people were listening to in the lead up. In addition to that, you had brother Spike Lee, who came out with Do the Right Thing, where there's a scene where the Korean shop owner, Steve Park, gets overrun. He got gang busted or bum rushed by people who were rioting because the Koreans disrespected them. All right. I'm just telling you, I'm just taking us back through the history of Wayne Williams all the way to the Koreatown riots. They called off classes at UCLA for the rest of the week. It didn't hit the west side, but it was getting up there. And as soon as I could, I went into Koreatown and looked at the damage myself. I visited the offices of the Korea Times, looked at the newspapers and the records, see what I can get. I wrote a short article. The leftist publications in New York City were not interested in publishing my article about it. Only one did, out of Boston, Z Magazine, which is a leftist magazine. So even the so-called left doesn't give a hoot about the yellow people. Well, Amy Goodman did in Democracy Now!, right? And I know you're going to get upset because she's a leftist, right? We hate leftists. We're in our little group here, and we can't listen to Democracy Now! But the reason why I don't trust the so-called indie right or conservatives, because they don't care about me. So I will return the favor. So that's my campaign speech for the yellow people of 2024. This is my rebuttal to Lauren Chen and these other people who are born-again Trumpistas, even though she's not even American, is not entitled to vote here. Gavin McInnes is not an American citizen. He's a Canadian agitator. Rebel media, he's not talking about the American South. I don't know what rebel he's talking about. I mean, he's talking about the English Revolution, but he's Canadian. Russell Brand is not an American. I am a third-generation American. Take a good look. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll end for now. I think you know that we're nearing the crisis point in American society at this pivotal moment in history. And we need to have these honest sessions to dispel some of the, I think, the complacency that's set in, especially amongst supposedly independent-minded people. people who are already celebrating the return to power of one Donald J. Trump. Peace. Thank you for listening. See you next week. God willing. Bye.